Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, binary folks out there.
And ladies and gentlemen.
Ladies and gentledoms.
Mm-hmm.
Tonight we have a great episode, but before we get into the episode, my name is Just.Hek, and joining me tonight is the lovely
Cindy Lee, host of Sex on Shuffle, pronouns they and she, or your succulents when it applies.
Awesome. There you go. And I am the host of Just Another Podcast. And tonight we're going to talk about how you identify. What's your ID? And we don't mean the plastic card that is administered by your state government. We talk about how you identify, whether you identify as a gentleman, gentlewoman, gentle them, gentle they, or you could just take out the gentle and just be they, them, he, she, or whatever.
Combination, whatever tickles your pickle.
Whatever tickles your pickle. I'm always down for a pickle tickle.
I'm sure. That's another episode.
Oh, my personal business in these streets like that. But
OnlyFans at Just.Hek.
Right? Just showing toe knuckles.
That's
Not
it.
even toes, just toe
That's
knuckles.
It. Yeah. Just pickle eating.
Yeah. Oh my God. But so tonight, obviously it's a tricky topic, especially when people are not educated. And obviously we've recently seen like people like Dave Chappelle kind of make mistakes based on I don't want to say ignorance, but based on just not miseducation or education that you gather from the masses, because what you learn in the street, people, it's crazy to even, as far as we've come in society, you still hear words like tranny and he, she, and
other things.
Yeah, like that's gay. I mean, yeah, you still hear things like that. And so while that may not be the total sum of what we're going to talk about tonight, it's just, it just goes to show that we still have a long way to go as a society, as a race of human beings.
Yeah.
But, there is some progress. So tonight, Cindy, when we talk about how do you identify, when you identify, what does that mean to you?
Well, for the context of this show, we're going to talk specifically about gender identity or gender specifically. For those of you who have seen the meme that was I think it stems from Stevani from Steven Universe, where there's this meme, and I'll find it and put it in the notes, where it's like, what's your gender? And it's like, I'm not a gender, I'm an experience. And I feel like even before the language, that feels good. The experience piece, I identify as a non-binary femme, and I still have connections to the community and the people that I hold that are folks who identify as all types of women, or folks who are rooted in values that are important to me, like womanism. But in terms of my identity, it's that. In terms of gender presentation, I feel like that's separate, and that's a conversation that we can have here in this space. But I like influx. I like playing with it because of the understanding that I have that gender is a performance. whether or not you want to go with the binary or not, it's a performative thing. You perform gender and it's perceived. And sometimes it's not perceived the way that you want, depending on whatever stereotypes that are happening in that time and in that context. What about yourself?
Well, let me ask you this. When you say that gender is a performance, what do you mean by that?
In terms of gender expression, right? Like we have, at least in my experience, that is the external, right? How you perform it, how you show it to the outside, but there's also a layer of how it's perceived, right? Which is why there's particular layers around folks who don't fall along the lines of quote unquote binary, even when they're not trans identified or non-binary identified,
right.
Which is a good learning example of all of these things are separate, right? Gender is separate from gender identity. Our concepts shift and change. I always bring up the easy example of, 40, 50 years ago, if you were a cisgender woman and you wore pants, your gender was questioned regardless, right? Like, but now that it's plays such a function, at least here in the States, it's not questioned as much as some other things, right? And there's nuance in that, because to me, there's certain things like race, like your body size, that can impact how your gender is perceived, regardless of how you feel like you're performing it, even if you don't think you're performing it, right? So in thinking about what gender means for us as individuals, at least in my experience, people associate particular roles or stereotypes or expectations around gender when they do the performing, because it's either in dress or in mannerisms, right? In gender roles or what we think are tied to the gender role that we identify as.
What do you think are some examples of that? Because this is an education, and you're giving like the exact terminology, which is great, so that people can understand. In layman's terms, basically what Cindy's trying to say is people perform what they perceive their gender to be. Like someone may be like, I'm the male role, so I'm going to hold out the chair for my partner or open the door because that's what the male role does. Well, I'm going to assume that it's my job to fix something in the house because that's my role as the male role.
Right, because you associate fixing something with someone who identifies as a man, right? Or a masculine thing.
Right.
Right. But then what happens when no quote unquote masculine representation exists? Those roles don't go away, right? Which is why there was that issue, for example, recently on the interwebs. If y'all are familiar, there was like this big, to me, I'm like, this is the 35th, 100th time it shows up. But there was an example of, do you buy a kitchen set for your child who's assigned male at birth, right? So he's being socialized and conditioned like a young man or boy. Do we buy kitchenettes for them or kitchens for them? And it's a good, I'm sure that's a start of a conversation for somebody, but to me, I'm like, I've heard these so many times. And I think about, 10 years ago, I had a homie looking for a kitchen for her son, and she couldn't find one that was like neutral colors. It was either like super, super pink or like little, what is it? The baking oven, right? Like it was very, or flowery, right? And that doesn't fit with a lot of young girls, let alone young boys. But it's just interesting that even now, 2022, 2021, we're still having that conversation. I think it's good to have it, but it just shows you that we are all at different levels of exposure in terms of that. And we've been conditioned to believe, me too. Like I wasn't raised in thinking that this shit is beyond that. I was raised in binary thoughts. And to me, in my experience, it was all informed by misogyny, right? This hatred of women. And I don't associate that with all masculinity. but it was informed and propped up even by women in my life, like not just men, but we uphold things just like white supremacy gets upheld by folks of all types, right? Like same kind of thing.
The white supremacy drop of the night.
Yeah. Because to me, if you want to go deeper, I feel like the binary came from white supremacy, right? And I'm sure there's receipts, and I'm happy to put some in the resources. But when you think about like decolonial thinking, and I know it's basically thinking about before white people came and took land, right? Or before white people try to indoctrinate certain countries, whether it be for possession or for goods, or just, promoting their Christianity. That's a whole nother fucking issue, right? Before that, there were examples of multiple types of gender. So with that same framework, what would have happened if we were raised, and some of us might have been, I don't know, I know I wasn't, right? But what happens if we were raised in a way that it's like, what do you like to do? What are the things that you value? They're not necessarily associated with genders, right? So we're still having certain conversations. And at the same time, we have moved forward to see things like Instagram allowing you to select your pronouns, or common practice, at least in my experience, is like these Zoom calls and stuff to put your pronouns up or put how you want to be addressed, regardless, right? Because back in the day, they used to be like, well, I don't got no trans kids in my school. I don't need to worry about that. And I'm like, but that you know of, right? Like we don't know until we know. and then that doesn't mean, like, how do we preemptively include everybody in the space? So then with that, I want to circle back, because I don't want this only to be, when it comes to you and your identity, is that something that you think about? And what, if somebody asks you, what's your ID, what is the language that you use?
I use he.
In terms of pronouns.
I identify as a cisgendered male. I don't really think about it too much. Mainly because I just go off of feeling. I go off of what I feel, what I, not necessarily was right, but just how I feel. I feel like a man, so therefore I am. I don't look to represent, like it wasn't like, it wasn't something that chose me, although I come from the same, or I come from a similar background as you. What was promoted, and I saw it from 3 different sides: Puerto Rican, Dominican, and African American. All very misogynistic to a certain standstill. The as you would say, the Latinx portions that I gathered were very like, women are in the kitchen, women take care of their men.
For sure.
Even though the women were the backbones. But there was almost like, well, the man, when he comes home, regardless of whether he ain't shit or he is or is not shit.
Right.
It was still like, yo, I held everything down, but I'm still gonna put his slippers down and make him comfortable.
Oh yeah.
And that was weird to me, because I'd be like, this dude ain't shit. You know what I'm saying? Like, I saw it,
the math didn't math.
No, I never did. And I was just like, okay, like it didn't make sense to me. And then from the African American side, very super homophobic, which karma works in mysterious ways, because 3 of the children turned out to be gay. So it was almost, and it's still to this day, it's not spoken about, but and 2 of the children, as I watched them grow up, and I noticed certain things, and I would just sit back and be like, okay, like one of them had Patti LaBelle posters up in his room, and I'm like,
yes, excellent.
It wasn't like young Patty, like it was like older Patty. And I'm just like, okay, that's interesting. Like, you like Patti LaBelle, huh? And that came from his grandmother, but and also, there were there were things that I noticed, and I was just like, okay, and I was just like, well, well, however that develops is what it is. And I mean, they all turned out to be great in their own right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're all have excellent careers. Like they grew up. They didn't grow up like it was funny how there was super homophobic ideologies growing up with them, but then when their children came out, it was just like, oh, okay, well, you know, and I guess that's for the betterment of their children. It just shows to show how much they love their children. But growing up, I mean, it was like, wow, like you know what I'm saying? Like, oh, don't do that. That you know, you're gonna be, you know,
Yeah.
you're gonna be an F-bomb. And it's like,
Yeah.
why? Like, you know what I'm saying? Or, you know, yeah, it is a different time. So, I mean, in terms, you know, but I don't know, I guess working, my education comes from working with the community, which started in 2001. Or rather, no, 2002, excuse me. And so, I mean, that's where my education came from, although there were like, my mom, growing up with her, when I did, she had gay friends or gay associates. Especially growing up in the time in the 80s where HIV/AIDS was like rampant, you know what I mean? And it was taboo to, you know, to hang out in those circles. My mom would have friends over. And so it wasn't a culture shock to me. It wasn't like, oh my God, like, you know what I'm saying? So I had this community around me from the time I was younger. But even she would say just this shit. I just be like, well, it was your friend. You know what I'm saying? But you know, it is what it is. But then, you know, like coming into the community and having people, well, I saw two sides to that. I saw people that were like, you should never say the F-bomb. And I had people that were like, yo, yeah, that person, you should call them that. And I'd be like, nah, I'm not gonna say that. Not gonna catch me up. No. That's not cool to say. I'm not gonna say that. That's not, you know. It became one of the words that I started to train myself to not say. That and the N word and the N-bomb. You know what I'm saying? As I got older, a lot of these words started to, I was like, why do I use them? There's no, I could say different things to get the same effect. If I'm trying to hurt somebody or whatever, or I'm trying to be slick with my tongue. So, but I don't need to say that. And so, I mean, that's in a nutshell. I mean, the community sort of raised me or educated me enough to be able to go up and say, you know, like, if someone says something to me, I'm just like, no, that's not cool to say, or, you know, or why are you challenging how that person identifies? And there's things that I still need to learn. There's things that I don't understand. I don't think it makes me a bad person that I don't know these things. I just don't have, I'm not, you know, there are things that I may ask you. I'll go to you and I'll be like, oh, what does that mean? Like, what do you mean? You know, like we had conversations previously, like about trans experience, right? And your thing was, you know, it has nothing to do with post, you know, surgeries or anything. Yeah. It's part of your lifestyle, part of your culture. And you don't have, you know, it has nothing to do with anything that you were thinking. And I was just like, okay, well, explain it to me, because my idea of transitioning is you start here and then you start at A, and there's B, and then you end up at C. Yeah. But I was wrong in that assumption, or in the, I mean, I wasn't wrong in the definition. It's and maybe the terminology should change because I mean, I don't know. I guess my thought is still, and maybe it's because I think that transitioning has a span, and not thinking like there's a lifespan to it. There's a whole life. You know what I'm saying? Like just because you start transition, I mean, because we all transition. We're all, you know, in our life and experiences, you don't start out as Cindy Lee and then get to this point without your life, your impact, you know, these life
like
changes.
shifts.
Yeah. So that's maybe the way that I'm not seeing it, or maybe I'm just interpreting it in a basic sense. And trans experience is much deeper and more complex, and there isn't a box for it. It's just like it just is what it is. And if however someone identifies, they don't necessarily have to define it to you.
Right.
You just have to respect it.
Right.
And, you know, and that's it. And that's basically in the sense where if I don't understand something, I'm still gonna be like, you know what? That's how they identify. If that's how they're gonna identify, then that's just how it is. Like, what does it matter if that the person wants to identify as she, but they have a penis? Or a person wants to identify as he, but has a vagina?
Or you don't know, right? Like so many folks is clocking people's crotches because they are centering their desire to know versus the humanity of the person.
Yeah.
And that's where the
crotch watchers,
the crotch lurkers,
the crotch lurkers,
the neck lurkers, like whatever things that we think we associate with gender, like even if you don't keep it a buck on the internet, right? Like you're listening to us now, you don't gotta tell nobody, but when you look at somebody or when you hear someone on the phone, 9 times out of 10, in my experience, you could tell me otherwise, you're gonna gender them. Yeah. Right? Whether or not you think it's a more feminine voice or feminine presented person, more masculine presented person, whatever that means. But we've also seen things that we either questioned or found quote unquote androgynous. And I think that's why this is a good conversation. And I want to point out based on what you were saying, right? Like the example that you're giving is a very specific example, right? So like you ask me questions, you're my homie, I'm gonna answer them, right? But if whoever's listening, if you don't have that access to have conversations with people that are close to you, don't be asking people all types of questions. Like, please teach me, because someone might hit you with the Google is free. Right? Even though Google is an access thing too, because I'm learning that not everybody knows how to search for things, and you might not find things, right? Like everything is an ad and algorithmic, and we'll talk about that when we talk about capitalism. But like it just shows you that shit is evolving. It's becoming more exposed. So I think part of the conversation of you learning knowledge, not you, but you, listener, is also unpacking what that means. Because it's going to shift things if that's new to you. Learning the more you're invested in being interested, and not just for work, it's saying not stable internet.
It's kind of chipping a little bit.
Not just because you have a job, but like not just because this is your job or something, because I know I talk about that a lot because I teach it to professionals, but it's also like, are you invested in community, whatever community, regardless of how they identify? Do you give a shit about human rights? Like the right, like who we are able to value as humans. And sometimes people will hear me and be like, oh, it's not that deep. And I'm like, but it is, because all that shit impacts how we relate to one another, how we have conversations, how we treat one another. And that trickles down depending on power and privilege you have in these systems, right? Like we're talking about gender in terms of gender for all of us, but I can't not bring up the harm that happens to trans folks, in particular Black trans folks, that comes from a place, that comes from the same places that some of us may have been socialized in, And that means we got unlearning. And if you believe in like decolonization, then we got some relearning to do because these things been existed, right? Like this is not just new or kids these days, because we're seeing that. We're seeing photos of folks of all types of gender, or we're finding out people were different genders than we thought they were historically, right? It just shows that whatever pushed on us got to get flipped on its head. So the same way we talk about race being socially constructed, but it's still having power, same shit with gender. Gender is a social construct. We've seen gender shift in ways, even now in other countries, they're going to be seen differently, right? And what genders exist and who does what in what dynamic, like what stereotypes are associated with a particular gender.
Yeah, nah, totally. So it's funny too, because like when we bring up the situation to talk about like transgender, it's probably like even within its own community, the hatred or the slamming, like, I mean, I think there's an evolution that's taking place now, but I remember in 2002, like it was like, oh, that there goes the dragon, or there goes the brick, and it'd be like, what? Like, yeah, because she looks hard, and I'm like, oh shit, like, damn, like, you know what I mean? Like it was just, it was bad, like it was, you know, and I didn't see it really improve until maybe about like 2013, 2014, where I worked, because I was still working in high schools at that time. You would see like coalitions in high schools, and you would see like, you know, there was just like
PSAs and stuff.
Yeah, and it was just like a general acceptance. It wasn't like, oh, like this is my trans friend. It was just a bunch of kids all together just chilling. And you just, you know, and it was just like whatever, like we're just living. Like we don't care what y'all got going on with your own shit. Like it was just like, oh, okay. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, so we've gotten to this point, which is good. And I see it now, like just in my commute to work, or just in general, the general verbiage around trans, in addition to LGBT, because it's always been easier to acknowledge gay and lesbian. It's super easy because it's like, oh, those are two men and those are two women. And that's just like the generic idea of it all, whatever. But with trans, it's always been like, well, what do I call you? It's like person, human being.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And so, you know, I think there's so much work to go. And obviously, you know, the more that we bypass the fear, because that's really what leads all this. There's a fear of if we allow this further unravels these boxes that society has come to put everything in.
Right.
And the box is it's unraveling more and more. It's getting looser and looser as each year passes, and people, you know, people are really losing their shit out there over on what to do, because I mean, honestly, it's crazy to even say that too, because it's like, what do you mean what to do? Like, you know, like what are we talking about? Like, why can't this person just be? You know what I mean? Or why can't, you know, like I don't, it's a lot.
It's thinking about all the boxes that are quote unquote unraveling. You got to start, it starts, if you weren't aware of it before that, you start to be aware of, well, shit, who made these boxes? And who is it supposed to contain? And who was included and not included in these boxes? And what was the purpose for these boxes to exist anyway? Because even if you look at the animal kingdom, there's different examples of a spectrum of either gender or sexual orientation, attraction, relationship dynamics. Like some people try to like say it's humans doing all types of shit, but I'm like, there's receipts in nature that exist, which is why I find it interesting, because so many folks will associate their religion with their hatred. But who made all these things? Like, if you believe in a God or in a baby white Jesus, you know, where do you think these came from? Like, this wasn't just us being like, oh, we're gonna pick something, we're gonna push shuffle, we're gonna press shuffle on creation, right? Like, this came from a place, but that's fine. That might be too deep, and I'm not trying to, you know, get Christian Mingle to like come at me, because I'm not interested. But it's really thinking about unpacking the things that, like, feeling the body piece. Like, some people be so mad, right? And it's coming from a place, and I'm like, but that's something for you to unpack, because it's so free to mind your fucking business, and it's so free to shut up. And there are free options for you to do research, right? Like, I'm not everyone, because not everyone has internet, right? Like, there's information out there, right? Like, there's places out there for us to continue to learn if we're invested in learning about folks. But like I said, you don't even gotta be for trans people. That's not even what this episode is for. To me, for me, in my opinion hat, if you're not for trans folks, I don't got time for you, all right? That's me. At the very least, examine how you look at your gender, right? How you, if you got kids in your life and you're a trusted adult, how are you framing that, right? You say, because there was something you said earlier and you were like, oh, that shit happens back in the day. I'm like, that shit happened 3 weeks ago, that I was caring for like young boys that are in my family, and my lover randomly gets a call and is like, oh, can you put on some football for them? And it was like 9 in the morning. And I was like, wait, why so I didn't ask. And I'm like, oh, kids, do y'all want to watch football? No, they wanted to watch Jurassic Park, right? But something, and this is my assumption because I haven't asked yet, but something told you to make sure your boys, and this was a man calling and asking for that make sure your boys are watching football. And I'm like, what kind of instruction do you think watching a game is going to do or not do? And what are the things that you think these young boys are doing that quote unquote aren't masculine enough? Because we talking about you know, a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old, right? So thinking about people talking about man up and shit to kids, that's why we got motherfuckers on TikTok super misogynistic, yelling, talking about they're being shamed because they're 5'1", right? Like, that came from a place, that anger, right? Like, that's something for you and your therapist. When I'm sure no one told you anything about you not being man enough because you're not tall, right? But something got you to believe these things about masculinity. And you're like, I have no way to regulate my emotions, so I'm gonna go on TikTok and just be mad at all women because I ain't getting no ass. Got it. Sure. Wonderful.
My brother tells a story. He tells me a story about how, and this is my brother from my father's side. I didn't meet until he was like 10 years old, right? And so he tells me this story about how him and his mom and my sister, they had moved to like Massachusetts. And so the parking, the garage door, that huge gate kind of thing, fell on his foot, was closed on his foot. And he's good, like he's fine, but at that moment, he was scared and the shit probably hurt. So he's like, yo, I was crying because the garage door was on my foot. So they get the garage door off his foot,
Mm-hmm.
and he's still crying, and his mother chastised him and tell him, you're supposed to be a man, stop crying. And I just looked, I said, wow. I was like, hey, it started to like, because he's a good dude, but there's some cynicism there with him when you talk to him about certain things. He's just like, you know what, like that shit made no sense to me. And he's not, I don't think he's as educated as I am about these things, because he doesn't have the experiences with those things.
Right.
But a part of him knew that just didn't make any sense. All right,
Yeah.
that was just not something to say to a child who just had a garage door fall on their foot.
That's just, I like, it hurt. I'm gonna fucking cry.
Like, or just from the fact that it's a garage door, you can't move. You're scared. I think he was like maybe 5 years old, 6. He was between 5 and 7. I have to like find out from him. But he was scared. And so,
Yeah.
it's like, I don't, it's just one of the things that you're right. I mean, obviously, I don't really hear about it now too much. I don't hear about it too much. Not to say it doesn't happen, but I'm pretty sure it does. Because there are people out there that just still don't understand that they don't understand evolution as a people. And listen, it was said a long time ago, you just wasn't paying attention, or maybe you're just not really understanding, but the revolution will not be televised. It's going on all around us
right now.
And the revolution can mean many things.
Absolutely.
And I think one of those things is freedom of self.
Yeah.
Freedom to be who you are, whatever that means. Because that's the first step in unlocking everything. It's the unraveling of the boxes. Like you said, there's a system. This evolution that's occurring, honestly, will probably be really old when we start to see, God permitting, or whatever.
Yeah.
Universal, whatever. Okay.
Whoever.
Yes, but I'm pretty sure 20 years from now, 30 years from now, there'll probably be a societal breakdown, or there'll be some sort of, quake in the
sooner.
I don't think so. Because right now I feel like society is still, it's like 70-30 right now. There's still things that people, and I feel like while people are willing to understand, there's also a retreat. It's kind of like white guys acting black. And the minute they get caught in doing something, all of a sudden it's, no, officer, you're totally right. Like it comes back to like, no, I'm gonna use this Caucasian to get out of this mess, because that's what's safe. So there's still a retreat to ignorance and fear that I've seen it. I've seen people, oh man, I love everybody, and then something happens and it's like, oh, you see, this is, and I've seen it. I'm just like, wow. Well, I mean, I guess you're really not an ally, or whatever. There's been situations that I've been privy to, and I'm just like, damn, it's funny that you feel like that, because, and I've even seen people of the community say these ignorant things, and I'm just like, wow. And it's no different from people of color saying the N-word to each other. I mean, there's, ignorance is ignorance, and it lives in all of us, and maybe there's a pre-training or whatever, but there's still, it lies within us. So I don't know if it's sooner. If it's sooner, then that's great, because I don't mind being wrong. But from the standpoint of where I'm looking at, it's kind of like, we're not there yet. But 10 years from now, we'll definitely be 60-40. And that's the closest we've ever come. You know what I'm saying?
And we'll see, because I don't know if people, that might be from our lens.
Yeah.
And I feel like the trajectory of the way that young people are and the other generations that come after us, it might get to the point where like you either get with it or get gone. Like, I mean, we could talk more about it when it comes to capitalism too, but you know, it's gonna be a point where these things are gonna crumble. And you have to ask yourself, are you that committed to your uninformed values than you are to wanting rights and freedoms to all folks, right? Even if you're the identity, because your identity doesn't absolve you from the work you got to do, because there's you know, like you just said, there can be trans people that are transphobic, there's hella queer people that are transphobic. The same way that there's all types of people that are anti-Black. That shit is baked right into the system. You have to be active in the work, right? Ally is not a cute little safety pin you put on or a Black IG photo to say, I'm here in solidarity, because I bet you all those people that was bigging it up around George Floyd, what's happening now? Like what kind of work is happening now? Like doing the work can't be performative, right? Like being for folks has to be an active thing, right? That has to be action involved and not just, oh, I know the names of the words, or oh, look at me, I'm so good, I know a pronoun, right? Because you can still be trash and know my pronouns. Like all those things can exist.
Definitely. Definitely.
Trash.
Oh man, no, 100%. 100%. I don't know. I think you have better faith in the human race than I do. But I would say this, you're definitely right about our youth. They're definitely coming along.
I'm like, they don't fuck around to me. I'm like,
no, they don't. They really don't. And that's admirable. I mean, it helps. I excuse a lot of the other dumb stuff that goes on because of I mean, it's almost like, you know, it's just like they don't have to define it, because you know, once you have to define it, you're creating a box, right? You're creating, you want to identify it and define it and then put it somewhere. Whereas it's just like, no, this is what it is. Like this, you know, that's my friend and that's it, you know, and not everybody, you know, it's not all youth, but it's like 70-30. And before that, 10 years prior, it was 60-40. And 10 years prior to that, it was 50-50. So, I mean, it's gradually happening. And the great thing about that is these kids grow up and then they're the ones out here and setting the trends and setting the norms or whatever.
It's happening now, for sure.
You know, so I don't know. It's dope. I think, wow, there's still a lot of work to do. I also want to, the whole Google thing, you gotta be careful with Google. Because you can Google something and you get some pages that are just like rooted in evil. And that's
why, like, you can't just say Google because not everybody got critical thinking skills.
Like
or no.
It's like, you know, some of the stuff you like, oh no, this is not the web page. This is not it.
No.
And when you're learning, you know, like you didn't learn your ABCs on your own. You had someone proctor them to you. Yeah. But we did it, is what I'm saying. You know, we were proctored it every day. A, B, C, you turned it into a song.
Yeah.
You learned elemental P, remember that?
Indoctrinated.
Yeah, it became part of, like, you learned it. And so sometimes, you know, people need that. But I also understand, like, it's not to walk up to a random person and be like, explain to me. Like, no.
Right, or like you said some trash ass shit and you're like, no, but teach me.
Yeah.
Who you sound like, y'all, you know. You know who you sound like. So it's really being conscious. And what you said is just another example of the importance of talking about these things in the institutions that we're bigging up. So like we learn at ABCs, we also need to learn how to address people, how to live in community, right? So like, that's why we need to talk about these things in school. If school is what you feel like we should be learning these things from, that means it needs to be included in the curriculum. I still haven't used Pythagorean theorem in anything, right? So, but what happens if we include some things that have actual life skills a little bit more generally, right? Instead of, I can list you a bunch of things that I fucking don't use in the things that they've institutionalized us in, right? Like, so again, that even goes to what's the importance of school? Like, why do they put us in these schools? Again, another box. What's the benefit of it? And but that's, I know that might be breaking it on its head.
That depends on your zip code.
And that's fucked up too, right? Because it depends on your property taxes and not the fact that you have mad people in your zip code. But that's again white supremacy and capitalism. Because it all goes back. And
if you live in an inner city, then your school is more like prep. Your school is prep, all right? And there are certain things within the correctional system that you'll find in a public school.
Another institution.
One of those things being Quick Chill. Quick Chill was developed in the correctional system, and it's a quick way to make food, to heat up food, and you can heat up mass quantities of that. And then we're getting super off track, but I'm just saying, you know, these things like Quick Chill, that's all in the public school system.
Right.
Bars on windows.
Right.
You know. Hall passes and instead of saying, yeah, I gotta go to the bathroom,
it's policing. And now on top of that, you're gonna tell me I can't go into certain bathrooms because I don't look like the gender that you think I should be in that bathroom.
Right, exactly.
So then again, where are we teaching young people body autonomy, especially Black and brown young people? How are we teaching them that your body is yours when all the receipts are saying that no, it's not, because we tell you what to do. We tell you where to eat, where to sleep, how to conduct yourself, what language to use. So the take-home message is either by yourself or in conversation with somebody that you trust. Talk about what you consider to be roles that men, quote unquote, should play and roles that, quote unquote, women should play. And whether or not that seems feasible once you look at it on paper. Because sometimes we need to see it on paper to understand, like, oh, that makes no sense. How this gender can do this, but I've seen people of the other gender do it. Well, now that's only for me to discuss, right? And that's why I'm like, I'm not telling you to come be a peer educator or nothing. I'm telling you to locate yourself in how you view gender so you can find out if you got irrational fears or stereotypes that you're imposing on other people based on what you've been taught or what you feel to be true.
Definitely. I would definitely write for women: cooking, cleaning, and nurturing. That's what I would prefer.
Right, and I'm like, and that's why dudes don't know how to do that. This dude's got nasty bathrooms and dry ramen in the fridge, right? And if this is uncomfortable for you, check me on that, right? Hashtag not all men if you want to. But like, don't tell me that that's not the truth. Don't tell me that like your mom let you go outside, and if you had a little sister, they weren't allowed, but you was ready to live your best life out in the streets by yourself without any knowledge or teaching 100%. Or no, go forth.
That's it. Yeah, you're a man. You'll be all right.
Another layer is that you have your young girl children raising your young boy children because you're indoctrinating them to be the emotional support,
the nurturer,
the emotional support pet for any dude in their life if they even decide to have cis dudes in their lives, which is a whole other issue. But we, like I said before, these are like our lived experiences. I stand on what I say 10 toes down. If you want to talk about it, Let's talk about it. If you have a question that you want to bring to us or something that resonated, or you want to hear Hector talk about it more, because I debo the conversation when it comes to gender. That might be a little masculine of me, right? Depending on how you view gender. Come talk to us. Where can they find you, Hector?
I'm scared to say. It's very masculine of you.
What's clenched?
Yeah, it's clenched.
Unclench yourself.
A lot of clenched right now.
Yeah, yes.
No, but that was great. Honestly, no, seriously, that was great. Because, so I mean, it's truth. There's a lot of exposure that needs to happen with certain things. And these things are still going on. We've been having these conversations. I know that we developed a curriculum back in 2003 that talked about, the programming of children with certain things, right? The pink kitchenette, the yellow Tonka trucks, what goes where. And it's crazy. I mean, I haven't done anything in a while, but I'm pretty sure if I did that activity, it would still be like 50-50, and I mean, I guess it's a work in progress, but anyhow, you can find me at Just.Hek on Instagram. You can Just.Hek production page on YouTube. I'm on Facebook. And I'm living rent free in Cindy Lee Alvis's head. So it's a condo. It's nice. It's very plush. But anywho, I have been Just.Hek.
And I'm Cindy Lee.
And we thank you guys for joining us. And take care. Mask up. Use hand sanitizer.
Please.
Don't lick poles.
Don't lick anything. Keep your mouth in the house. Do what you want with that mouth in the house.
Oh my God. And have a great time with your life. Until the next one, y'all, we take care. You take care. Be safe out there. Peace. And there you go. Is what I was waiting for.
I know.
And there's no gender on that.
Sure.